Talking about burials and mummification, it's time now to introduce you to another priest, probably the last member of the family buried in this family complex, who was called Neferinpu. Again, as in most cases, the superstructure of the tomb was of no great importance. It was a corridor chapel with 4 cult places, 4 places for false doors. So there were more persons buried inside. We managed to reconstruct only 1 false door that consisted originally of 3 pieces belonging to this Neferinpu, who is, among other things, also attested in the archives in Abu Sir. This is another intellectual game that we love to pursue since several years. We have so many officials attested by mastabas and tombs and individual interments in South Abu Sir that it's very likely that in most cases we find their names in the archives from the royal complexes, and these archives give you very, very detailed information about how these officials worked in the service of the king. So we have written documents, we have even payments they were receiving every month for it, and we have the mastaba. So in many cases, not always, but in many cases, we are able to tell you about these people more detail than you are able to provide us about your family in the 19th century. That's how Egyptology works today. So he was attested in one of the papyri. His burial chamber again was found intact. As you can see here on the right, it's the sarcophagus with slit in position with 10 beer jars, because the ancient Egyptians were similar like the Czechs, lovers of beers. The 10th jar is, by the way, here. You can see 9 of them, and the 10th one is here. And completely decayed wooden box with 4 canopic jars inside. And this brings me to another myth in ancient Egyptian archaeology. Most people think that mummification was quite common, even in the upper middle classes, which is wrong. It was not. We have many other stations. This is just one example for all of them. Inside the sarcophagus, there was a stone sarcophagus. There was this Neferinpu lying again undisturbed. Only his body was covered with a mud plaster to preserve his body for eternity. He also got some burial equipment inside: walking stick, a unguent vessel for some perfume, quite standard faience beads on his head, and then headrest made of acacia wood, and this pectoral. Yet, when we expected the body itself, we found out that it was not mummified, and also the canopic jars were found completely empty. So this was a sort of ritual game they were performing. Of course they paid for the canopic jars. They had enough money just to arrange for it, but they had no money to pay for the mummification, which was really a very expensive process. So he just imitated, even for the afterlife, that he was rich enough to afford mummification, and nobody could check on it, because once they sealed the burial chamber, the game was over. And the same concerns the beer jars. They were sealed, okay, and they were full. Do you know of what? Mud. Just mud. So they appeared really heavy when the people were moving them from the surface down the shaft, 10 meters down, but they were filled just with mud. They were quite practical. And again, this is a feature that you can discern from Nagada too. It's not just Neferinpu or some other tombs. It was this tendency towards practicality, if I may put it in this way, was quite widespread since prehistoric times in ancient Egypt. So this is the story of Neferimpu. And in 2007, now the 3D scanning is quite popular and everybody does it because it's nowadays with the level of the technique and computer sciences almost a piece of cake. But in 2007, those of you who have some experience can remember it was really tricky. So there were only handheld scanners like this one. So this is 2007 when we decided to scan 2 of the skulls that were discovered in these mastabas and to perform facial reconstruction that gives you a probability around 75 to 80% when reconstructing facial features of a given person. So this is the process, a 3D model of the skull, then one of the steps when we started to reconstruct the muscles, the final appearance of the model, and then the conversion of these models into real 3D representations of these mastaba owners. The man on the right is the sun priest Neferimpu. So this is our reconstruction from 2007-2009. By the way, the final touches that were the most expensive process were performed by a guy who was the chief masker of the Borgia series. If you saw that series, it was at least in Europe, it was quite famous.